Ghadab, because it's one of these quwwa, it's coming from something that's essential to the human nature. Right? If you look at the brain, the way the brain has been made, right? They call the human brain a triune brain because it has 3 dominant centers. And this is also not so modern. I mean, this is actually, Imam al-Ghazali does mention this. The lowest brain, they call it the R brain, which is really out of evolutionary theory, the reptilian brain. And this is the appetitive center of the brain. It functions, these basic functions, the drive, the urges of the human being, the food urge, the sex urge, all these urges. And then there's the midbrain. So this would be relate to the appetitive, and then the midbrain is where the emotions are centered. And from this model, the root emotion is ghadab. And this is why children, the real first emotions that they display are ghadab. They get angry, right? And they express the anger through crying, and as they get older through, tantrum, or they always learn la before they learn na'am, right? They learn no before they learn yes. And you can see it rooted in that. So this brain is related to the emotions, and this is why there's a beautiful hadith in Imam at-Tirmidhi, in which the Prophet said, "Ahbib mahbubak hawnan ma, asa an yakuna baghidak yawman ma, wa abghid baghidak hawnan ma, asa an yakuna mahbubak yawman ma." He said, love the one you love up to a point, because one day he might hate you. And the wisdom here is, if you tell somebody all your secrets, and then one day they turn on you, which is a human experience. It occurs quite often. And people are often devastated by that. And also, don't hate people extremely, because one day that you might end up being people that love each other. So be balanced in your love and in your hate. And so this is again an indication of having a balance of emotions. And when they get out of balance, people become, if you have too much love, one of the Arabs, he said, "La takun sukkaran fatubla." Don't be sukkar and get eaten up. "Wa la takun hamdala faturma." And don't be colocynth and get thrown away. Don't be too sweet, because they'll eat you alive. And don't be too bitter, because you won't have any friends. Right? So be balanced. And that's the idea. And then finally, what they call the new brain is the neocortex, which is where this would be the quwwat al-ilm, the rational. When these 3 are functioning properly, the human being is adil. Right? In other words, and see, this is part of the human condition. You have people that are excessively cerebral. They're completely in their heads. And everything's theoretical to them. There's nothing practical. They go to this extreme. Then you have other people that are like reptiles out there. They're literally living like reptiles. And I explained this once in a prison, and some of these people, Muslim inmates, really responded to this. And one came up to me afterwards. He said, "You know that thing about the reptilian brain?" He said, "There's a lot of reptiles here." He said, these guys are like snakes, just waiting to attack you. Right? It's an interesting phenomenon, this idea of people in that really completely reactionary mode. Right? There's no humanity there. And then you have people that are, obviously, you see them overly emotional. Right? They're either angry, right? They become, and that's the more common one, to get people that are very angry. So now, I just brought all of that in there to put this into perspective. Anger is one of the excesses of the human condition, which is why he calls it the ocean, because it really is the big one. And there's basically three reasons why people get angry. One of them relates to primal needs. Food, shelter, life, those type things. That's the first type of... Now this is majbool. Yani the human being, if he doesn't get angry for this, he's considered ahmaq. He goes under the category of stupidity. Because this is a survival. If somebody's threatening your life, you have to respond to it. Right? I mean, you need to respond to it. If somebody is threatening your family, you need to respond to that. That is a ghadab that Allah loves. And Allah loves shuja'ah walau fi qatli hayya, even in killing a snake. It's a hadith. And also the Prophet ﷺ said, "Man mata duna malihi mata shahida." Anyone that dies defending his wealth dies a shaheed. So that ghadab, and because part of it is you don't want people to think it's easy in a society to rob people. You don't, I mean, your act in doing that is a type, it's an ultimate amr bil ma'ruf and nahi anil munkar. And if you die doing it, you died in jihad. Because amr bil ma'ruf and nahi anil munkar is jihad. It's in bab al-jihad. It's a type of jihad. So, the second type is also, and this is common to human beings. The second type is also common to human beings. But this relates to position. Right? Jah. Or it relates to things that have to do with ru'yat al-nafs, seeing yourself. Right? In other words, I have dignity. He can't do this to me. Right? I'm a human being. And this kind of anger that people get angry about that relates to a sense of belittlement. Somebody is belittling them. Somebody is treating them with disdain. Somebody is treating them less than what they want. And they could be right, they could be wrong. It just depends. Because some people have a completely, they have a complete delusion about who they are. Right? A delusion of the grandeur of their own soul. And so they actually... And then finally, the third one relates to specific people. This is a specific one, and this relates to, for instance, an alim, if he sees a book being mistreated, will get angry. But the farmer who's illiterate, he won't get angry, because he doesn't really understand, what's the big deal? He sat on a book, so what? Whereas the alim sees it, that's wrong because it's related to his. Now, the farmer will get angry if you throw the pitchfork, because it's his tool. What are you doing? That you're going to break that, and he'll get upset at that. So this is a type of anger that relates to specific people, right? So, and these three are why people get angry. Now, Imam al-Ghazali says the first one is healthy, unless it's taken to an extreme where you go and oppress people. Take their food, take their shelter, do things like that. That's oppression. But the next one, he says, it can be healthy up to a point. But the higher way is to stop seeing yourself and not get angry about these things. And the danger of it is you go to an extreme which is called da'a, and he'll deal with that. It's a disease, which is where you become so humble that you become humiliated. And the Prophet ﷺ says, "Al-mu'minu la yudhillu nafsah." The mu'min does not humiliate himself. And Allah says that they're a'izza ala al-kuffar, ruhama'u baynahum. They have izzah when it comes to the non-Muslims. You're not all humble and meek and Uriah Heep obsequiousness. Right? You have izzah with the kafir. He shouldn't see you as being humble and weak like that, when in the face of him. Whereas with the mu'min, you should give up those things, right? And even according to Sidi Ahmed Zarruq, if the kafir says something to you that does not relate to your deen, like not making fun of your deen or something, that you should just ignore it. إِذَا خَاطَبُهُمُ الْجَاهِلُونَ قَالُوا السَّلَامُ. When ignorant people speak to them, they just say salam. You shouldn't get angry for things that really there's no benefit in getting angry, because all they're doing is pushing buttons. And that's why Allah says, وَاصْبِرْ عَلَى مَا يَقُولُونَ وَهْجُرْهُمْ هَجْرًا جَمِيلًا. Just be patient about what they're saying, and then leave them in a good way. Right? So just turn away from it. Don't obsess yourself with it, and let it go, because there's no benefit in it. No benefit. So, and then finally, the fourth one, again, if there's ghayra is something that Sa'ad radiallahu anhu, when the Prophet ﷺ was mentioning about the wife, and Sa'ad said, Wallahi, if I found a man with my wife, لَأَقْتُلَنَّهُ, I'd kill him. And the Prophet ﷺ said, أَنَا أَغْيَرُ مِنْ سَعَدٍ, I have more ghayra than Sa'ad. وَاللَّهُ أَغْيَرُ مِنِّي, and Allah has more ghayra than I do. In other words, that is a good sign. Ghayra is a good thing. And they say ghayra, sometimes it's translated as jealousy. It's an idea of something that you are in protection of, or that, something that's yours, that not letting somebody else do harm to it. A ghayra takes you. So this is why when a Muslim sees the non-Muslim threatening his deen, he gets a ghayra. He becomes ghayur for the deen. He wants to defend the deen. And that's a good thing. That's an anger that's positive. And this is why Allah has made ghayra part of the human nature, to protect nasab. Because if men didn't have ghayra for their women, they would lose nasab. People would go and commit adultery with their women, and then you would have a mixture of the nasab. So ghayra is a healthy thing for a man to have. To be jealous of his wife is a good thing, as long as it doesn't go to, obviously, an excess where he oppresses her, right, and becomes suspicious. And it's also a natural thing for the woman to have that ghayra, right? I mean, Allah has made mubah. He permitted the marriage of more than one wife. But the actual experience of a woman towards the man of ghayra is natural. It's part of human nature, and very few women are free from that. So it's not considered a fault, right? Right. Now he says here, له دواءان دواء يرفعه فلا يجي والثاني إن جاء يدفعه. He says that this disease has two cures. One of them will remove the anger when it comes, right? So that you prevent it from coming. And the second will suppress the anger. Now Allah says in the Quran, He praises وَالْكَاظِمِينَ الْغَيْظِ, those who suppress their anger, وَالْعَافِينَ عَنِ النَّاسِ, and those who forgive people. وَاللَّهُ يُحِبُّ الْمُحْسِنِينَ. And that's the famous story of Ja'far al-Tayyar, when one of his servants was pouring and spilt water on him. He became angry, and the servant immediately said, وَالْكَاظِمِينَ الْغَيْظِ, and he said, كَظَمْتُهُ, I suppressed it. And he said, وَالْعَافِينَ عَنِ النَّاسِ, and he said, عَوْفَوْتُكَ, I forgive you. And he said, وَاللَّهُ يُحِبُّ الْمُحْسِنِينَ, and he said, Allah loves the people of ihsan. He said, you're free for the sake of Allah. And that's the way the mu'min should be, waqaf عند حدود الله. He should be somebody, when he hears the Quran, in other words, if somebody's backbiting and somebody says, Ya akhi, لا يغتب بعضكم بعضا, he should immediately say, astaghfirullah. He shouldn't get angry at the person that he reminded him. And I was once told a story of Sheikh Ibn al-Habib, that a man was with him in a gathering, and he said one of his qualities, he was a Moroccan Sheikh, he said one of his qualities was he never spoke ghiba about anybody. And this is also something that I was told by several people who have been with Murabit al-Hajj for over 70 years, and they've said they never heard him once speak badly of a person, ever. And these are people that lived with him every day of his life, see him every day. In 70 years, they said they never heard him once say anything bad about anybody, ever. And, somebody wrote me a letter not that long ago and said, and he's somebody that I think has a lot of taqwa, but he wrote me a letter and he said that he mentioned me in another letter to somebody, and he thinks maybe there was some ghiba in it, so he sent the letter with the thing. He said, if you find any ghiba in it, please tell me so that I can make tawbah. Right? I mean, he was questioning what he'd said, and it was just some disagreements between his understanding and my understanding, which wasn't a problem with me at all. But that type of, even though you don't have to do that, it's called istihlal, or in Sharia, you don't have to go to a person and say, Sheikh Ahmed Zarruq says it's better not to. Unless you know that there are people that aren't going to, because a lot of people will just make them hate you. And if you go and you say, listen, I did ghiba about you, they'll get angry. Whereas other people, it's not a big deal. So, like the Prophet said, يَعْجِزُ أَحْدُكُمْ أَنْ يَكُونَ أَلَّا يَكُونَ مِثْلُ أَبِي ضَمْضَمْ or أَبِي ضُمْضَمْ. Does one of you, are you unable to be like this man, Abu Damdam? He used to get up every morning and تصدق بعرضه على الناس. He used to give his own good name as sadaqah for people. In other words, he would just say, Ya Allah, if anybody says anything bad about me, I give the hasanat that they gave me back to them. And so he said, just do that. Who cares? In the end of the day, if you start thinking about the grave and questioning in the grave, the Yawm al-Qiyamah, if you really think about these things, you're not going to care. I mean, the moment you die, you could care less if so-and-so, said one day that he gets angry too much. Or he said to you one day something that made you angry. It's all going to be completely irrelevant. So, the two diseases, he said, the first one, and then he said here, فَاذْكُرْ لِتَزْدَانَ بِحَلْيَ الرَّافِعِ كَثْرَةَ مَدْحِ الْحِلْمِ وَالتَّوَاضُعِ. He said, remember, in order to be ornamented with this quality of the thing that removes anger, remember the praise of hilm and tawadu'. Because no one gets angry who's a mutakabbir. The mutakabbir can't, the mutawadi', he doesn't get angry. Somebody who's humble, they will not get angry for themselves. They might get angry for Allah, but they won't get angry for themselves. Because Sidi Ahmed Zarruq said, Al-ghadabu tuntijuhu ru'yatun nafs. The only reason people get angry is because they're seeing themselves. And if the self's not there to see, then why get angry? If somebody says, Ya kalb, and it's like the Prophet when they called him, A'udhu billah, Mudhammam, right? They called him the opposite of his name. He said, it's amazing how Allah took the tongues of Quraysh that wanted to condemn me, and they condemned some guy named Mudhammam. And I'm Muhammad. Right? So he didn't get angry. He just said, they're not talking about me, they're talking about Mudhammam. I'm Muhammad, right? So that's that idea of just letting it go. If you don't see yourself, there's no self to get angry. And that's tawadu'. And what he's saying is, in order to get this quality, remember how much humility and forbearance is praised. Right? In other words, every culture praises traditional. This culture no longer does. They used to. Right? I mean, humility. There are still people that will do that. But there's definitely one of the things that certain Eastern European elements that immigrated here introduced into the culture was a concept of chutzpah. Right? This idea of overweening pride, where you literally, if you've got it, flaunt it. Type thing. And this has become something which is actually alien to traditional American culture. Traditionally, Americans actually did appreciate the quality of humility. And generally, it's obviously you're going to get a lot of different people. But what you'll find is humility is praised by all the sages, even outside of the religion of Islam. Right? And the Prophet ﷺ said, "Man tawada'a lillah rafa'ahu Allah." The one that is humble for Allah's sake, Allah raises him up. And whoever raises himself up, wada'ahu Allah, Allah lowers him down. And Qaswa, the camel of the Prophet ﷺ, it used to race outwind all of the camels of the Arabs, and the Sahaba really liked that because it was the Prophet's camel. But one day it lost a race to a Bedouin, and they all got really upset. And the Prophet laughed, and he said, "Don't you know that nothing ever gets elevated except Allah has to bring it down?" Right? So it's the sunnah of Allah in His creation. And if you understand the sunnah, you can laugh at things like that. You don't get upset. So he's saying, if you really reflect on the praiseworthy quality of hilm and tawadu', and kana ahlam an-nas, the Prophet was the most forbearing of people. He forgave people. He did not get angry. He was very forbearing.